Good evening, my name is Nathan Hamilton.
And I'm Talia Gaines. Welcome to our 5th annual Genius Project Symposium.
The Genius Project is a year-long project that students start in their junior year.
Students are invited to pursue a project of their choice that reflects their curiosity, makes an impact, and that gives them something new to learn about. It's sure to be an awesome night of honoring what Sage Creek Bobcats are capable of.
We'd like to start off by thanking Mr. Schuweiler, Mr. Robertson, and Mrs. Harrington for their contributed support to this journey.
Thank you, PTSA, the Sage Creek Foundation, and Carlsbad ED Foundation for your charitable donations and for rallying around this project.
To our parents, staff, accountability buddies, professionals in the room, and all Bobcat family members, we appreciate your generosity in hosting, advising, and supporting our students.
It truly takes a Carlsbad village, and you guys have done all that and more, so thank you.
This year, our showcase looks a little bit different.
That's why our Genius Project theme, which is adaptable, seems so appropriate. This year, Sage Creek students had to be adaptable in more ways than one.
And as we celebrate tonight, you'll see just how adaptable these students have been. Without further ado, let's get our show started.
Last month I got a concussion. I was snowboarding up in Utah, went over a jump, fell on my head and blacked out. When I woke up, I could barely see, barely speak, and barely stand. I also couldn't get a sentence together, as evidenced by the Snapchat sent to my friends. Notice the lack of pupils. I had been what they call factory resetted. You know how when your iPhone bugs out and they tell you to turn it off and on again? That was my brain. Medical help was nowhere to be found, so I did exactly what you're not supposed to do when you're concussed, and I got up and snowboarded to the base. I tell you the story because it reminds me a lot of my Genius Project experience. Originally, my partner Audrey and I wanted to hold a STEM convention marketed towards girls in our school gym. This would involve having stations run by women who worked in science-based fields talking about what they do. The mission was to get girls excited about STEM, and it was our response to the lack of women in STEM careers. However, come March, having 100 people in a gym no longer seemed feasible. Our date had been wiped from the calendar, our venue had been shut down, and our volunteers were no longer available. Thank you, COVID. Much like myself, our project had been thrown into the air, knocked on its head, and factory resetted. And much like myself, we had no idea where we stood and no idea where we were going next. As you all know, planning beyond the next week is not something that has been characteristic of this past year. So we decided to wait until we knew more about when things were going to open up because we were determined to keep the event in person. This was definitely not because we wanted to procrastinate until college application season was done. It wasn't until December, 2 months after our event was scheduled to happen, that we had to face reality. It was time to start over. The past year had handed us nothing but unknowns, so we decided to stick with what we knew. We had started because we were passionate about getting girls excited about STEM, so that was how we were going to finish. This sparked phase 2 of our project, aptly named STEM Convention, but also not really. The new goal was to interview as many young women as possible and place it on a website that girls could access to learn about what type of girls are in STEM, the path they took to get there, and the problems they face as women along the way. We reached out to women from Qualcomm, Thermo Fisher, UCSD, UCLA, and even Sage Creek. At such late notice, we were expecting maybe only a couple interview offers from some of our friends, but the responses were actually overwhelming. Women across the country were asking us to be interviewed. I had one chem major from the University of Richmond who said she'd heard from a friend of a friend about our mission, and so therefore messaged me for an interview. It was validating to see that an impact was actually being felt. Not only were we inspiring girls by showing them role models, we were providing opportunity for women in STEM to preach about the highs of doing what they love and the lows of being a minority in their field. Some interviews even ran about 15 minutes over time because the interviewees just couldn't stop talking. They were just as passionate about this as we were. In the past month, Audrey and I have interviewed women from all areas of STEM. We've edited these interviews down, written up transcripts, and are about to publish our website. Girls wondering what an aeronautical engineer does in a day, the workload they can take on as a chemistry major, or even just what type of classes they can take in high school, can all find these answers on our website. More than this, though, they can find women who are driven and passionate about STEM. I'm super happy about how my project turned out, but it's still not what I expected it to look like. But a theme I see in a lot of Genius projects this year and in past years is that almost nobody's project looks like what they had originally planned. A lot of people have had to restart, and a lot of people have had to adapt. This leaves a lot of us asking, what's the secret to starting over? For Audrey and me, the answer was passion. Growing up without female representation has cemented our passion to provide that for the next girls. And it turns out women across the country felt the same as well. They felt outnumbered in their STEM classes, in their offices, in their lecture halls, and even in their Zoom meetings. This shared passion made them more than willing to go out of the way to contribute. We followed a cause that made not just us, but others feel something, and so they were driven by this emotion to help. And not only did passion just make our project, it made our project better. The excitement you can see in the women we interviewed is hard to ignore, and we hope the girls who are watching are inspired by it as well. This past year has taught us that we never know what tomorrow's going to look like. One day you're in math class, and the next you're watching your teacher learn what Google Meet is in real time. There are going to be times where we have to factory reset, and there are going to be times where we have to get up and find our way down the mountain. But if you remind yourself of the passion that got you up there in the first place, it's going to be a whole lot easier than you think. Hopefully without the concussion, though. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jack Gogol, and this is my Genius Project, CAPID Peer Tutoring. Let me begin with a short story. I am 6 years old, attending a friend's birthday party at the YMCA. Parents are talking, kids are running around, music is blaring. We're called over to play dodgeball, a game I'd never played before. With all the noise, I missed out on an important detail. I thought the object of the game was to get hit by the ball. Imagine my confusion when I repeatedly jumped in the direction of the ball and was asked by everyone to leave the court. This sums up my earlier life with CAPID. I could hear everything, but I wasn't hearing everything the way it was intended. So what is CAPID? CAPID stands for Central Auditory Processing Disorder. It is a hearing disorder interfering with the connection between my hearing and my language processing. I can hear fine, but my brain struggles to interpret all the sounds, particularly in noisy environments. CAPID has had a huge impact on my life. It was especially difficult in elementary and middle school, where I struggled both academically and socially. Classrooms were noisy. Students were talking at the same time. The playground was a nightmare. I struggled to follow conversations with all the competing noise. Being in a state of constant confusion caused short-temperedness, poor grades, and low self-confidence. Starting in middle school, I began to implement a series of strategies to help address my CAPID challenges. These strategies include, but are not limited to, repeating instructions directly to teachers, prioritizing visual body language, sitting in the front of the classroom, and wearing low-gain hearing aids. These strategies allowed me to address my auditory challenges, which helped me take control of my academic skills and social interactions. I was no longer held back from my ambitions thanks to these strategies. These strategies also presented opportunities for growth. I learned to take initiative and practice self-advocacy by communicating with my teachers and mentors regarding the strategies I needed. My Genius Project is tutoring younger students with CAPID the skills and strategies I have learned throughout my life. Working online, I have connected to over a dozen students around the world: Florida, Australia, Dubai. Despite our global differences, we all share a common life experience: CAPID. As someone who has had CAPID all their life, I can empathize and relate to my students in a way that cannot be replicated. This is how I make a difference. The shared experience of life with CAPID has been immensely valuable to working with my students. My students can see me not as an authority figure, but as a role model who can model out scenarios and strategies for them to follow. They can be inspired that despite their obstacles, they can overcome them and succeed. To begin my project, I consulted with my audiologist. She had previously expressed concern over the pandemic's impact on younger students with CAPID. Where I had always struggled socially on the noisy playground, now there was no playground at all. Virtually, younger students with CAPID struggled to interact with their peers, leaving them isolated and upset. I joined a CAPID Facebook group to connect with families. After scouting initial feedback, I found strong reactions with playing online games with the younger students. Through online games, I could role model social and academic CAPID strategies in a safe environment where the student can make no mistakes. This is a flyer I created to begin my project. I started out playing Minecraft, but that's since evolved to other mediums. I focus on whatever the student wants. Sometimes we just talk. For my project, I learned to use technology to assist working online. I tutor through Zoom, schedule through Calendly, gain insight through Google Forms, and advertise through CAPID Facebook groups. This is a Google form I have parents of new students fill out. Through this form, I gain insights into the students' likes, dislikes, and any potential parental concerns. This is my Calendly account, where families schedule appointments with me. I work every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, since June of 2020. Overall, I have logged over 200 hours of CAPID peer tutoring in the past year. I tutor students through Zoom. I send weekly reminders to parents prior to all sessions. I also routinely communicate with parents, providing an update on how their student is doing and providing an opportunity to share any thoughts. Given the online nature of my project, the pandemic did not significantly challenge my peer tutoring. However, it did give me something to think about. If there was one positive quality to take away from this pandemic, I believe it is our increased globalization. We are more willing to take to virtual platforms such as Zoom, and in the process, we can communicate and connect with more people than perhaps previously possible. Through online, I was able to connect to over a dozen students around the world who shared my experiences. This would not have been possible had I limited my tutoring to in-person. However, at the end of the day, it comes down to the emotional impact of my CAPID peer tutoring. Seeing my students improve over the last year has been tremendously rewarding, particularly because I understand what it is like to live with CAPID. Whenever I work with my students, I often recognize similarities to my younger self. This makes my tutoring remarkably motivating, as I can reflect on my past struggles while helping my students overcome their own. But this interaction is not one-sided. My students have shown me their own strategies, leading me to discover improvements to my strategies, which I can then pass on to my other students, creating a cycle of CAPID peer tutoring. In January, my project expanded. I was asked to present on my experiences with CAPID peer tutoring to older students with CAPID interested in doing the same. This vastly expanded the scope of my project, as we were able to reach a larger sum of experiences and strategies than ever before. For instance, for the first time, we are now seeing many girls interested in tutoring, and by extent, we are now seeing many more girls interested in being tutored on how to address their CAPID challenges. At said presentation, I gave 7 tips to being an essential CAPID peer tutor. However, I believe these tips apply to any online tutoring. These 7 tips are to communicate, build trust, tutor by example, work with parents, use technology, time manage, and enjoy the process. Although I will be attending UC Berkeley next year, I hope to continue my CAPID peer tutoring. Seeing my students improve over the last year has been tremendously heartwarming, and I hope to continue this tutoring into the foreseeable future. Many students with CAPID struggle academically, and I hope I can serve as a role model to them and inspire them to overcome their obstacles. Because I believe every last student that I've worked with in the past year can, has, and will overcome their challenges. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Cepek, and I'm joined by Alana Woodburn to tell me a little bit more about her Genius Project. So first off, Alana, how has your Genius Project evolved since you began?
So when I first began, My primary goal was just to spread awareness about human trafficking because I had interned with the district attorney, Summer Steffen, and I learned about the problem, and I found a commonality among trauma. And while I have post-traumatic stress from gun violence, I can relate to that feeling of being robbed of safety and feel like you were robbed years of your life that you can't get back. And over time, that's evolved to trauma advocacy for a spectrum of survivors, people who come from different backgrounds, maybe homelessness, domestic violence. We can all relate to these feelings of being robbed of safety and years that we can't get back. I think it's really important to advocate for trauma universally so that we're not exclusively advocating for resources that might already be more popular than other resources, if that makes sense. You know, someone who is a veteran might be better received, or they might be, I guess, more advocated for to get treatment than somebody who is perhaps a child sex trafficking survivor, because you know, that conversation isn't as amplified in society, I think.
And how have you used your own experience with post-traumatic stress disorder to influence your project?
So I think my own experience with post-traumatic stress, it definitely has given me the drive and the grit. Growing up, you know, I was injured when I was 7 years old. So I've kind of grown up with post-traumatic stress rather than having to adapt to a completely new reality when I was an adult or something. So I've, you know, experienced the uncomfortable questions in classrooms, the intrusive questions from my peers, crude jokes. So I can relate to, I guess, kind of the outside feeling that it feels like to have trauma. You always kind of have to tiptoe around talking about it, but then other people kind of can invade on that, but that's just because there's a lack of conversation and a big misunderstanding. But I think because I have post-traumatic stress and I understand what it's like to walk through life with a kind of a different lens that other people have, the hypervigilance, the re-experiencing, I'm able to relate to survivors in that sense.
And how do you think we can change the conversation around trauma?
I think amplifying survivors' voices. I think we need to start validating people when they choose to talk about their experiences, because when you amplify survivors' voices, you're helping start that conversation, and once that conversation starts, we can start investing in education in our communities, and essentially education is prevention. So.
And lastly, how would you describe your Genius Project in one word?
I would say persistent. I think I've been very persistent. I think I've had to adapt a lot to, you know, my initial, goal for my project was to have like a speaking event here at Sage, but obviously when the pandemic happened, that wasn't going to happen. And then I moved to education implementation. Well, now we have to focus on distance learning, and so then I evolved to kind of taking things into my own hands and taking to social media and my website and getting involved in my own community in a more direct and hands-on way.
Well, thank you, Alana, for joining us and telling us a little bit more about your Genius Project.
Thank you.
It all started on a random Friday afternoon. I had a realization that Sage Creek never had a class or club of any sort that taught students to make choices that adhere to a healthy lifestyle. All of a sudden, it hit me. I was going to create a nutrition club for the students at my school. Realizing that it was senior year in the middle of college application season, I knew that I couldn't make this club successful on my own. Over quarantine, Chloe and I both had found a passion for health and wellness, and I knew that she was the perfect person to run my club with. Ecstatic at the idea of starting a new club, Chloe and I began work right away. Within a matter of days, our club had an executive council, several members, a club advisor, Instagram account, and website. Health is Wealth Club was born.
Now, before we go on even more about our club, let us first introduce ourselves. My name is Chloe Blankenhorn, and I'm joined here today with my amazing Genius Project partner, Morgan Mayorga.
We are your Health is Wealth Club founders and co-presidents. We are so excited to be here, so thank you to everyone who has helped us along the way.
As for a little bit more about our club, we meet every Tuesday via Google Meet. This year, our amazing club members have learned about topics that contribute to an overall healthy and balanced lifestyle. Some examples being how to create a balanced plate to myths that are commonly found on social media.
After talking with a few members of our executive council, we decided that we wanted to make our club even bigger. That conversation formed our first club event, which allowed students to make the recipes that they learned about earlier that week. Pumpkin mug cakes. It was the perfect recipe to make that was easy, simple, delicious, and in the September spirit. We were shocked at how many people wanted to come to our event, and all of them told us how much fun they had.
As time passed and weekly meetings were hosted by both Morgan and I, Health is Wealth Club was blossoming into one of the most successful clubs that Sage Creek has ever seen. Little did we recognize at the time that Health is Wealth Club was more than just a club, but a family of both students and friends who shared a common love for food and a passion for nutrition.
It was late October when we decided that we wanted to push our club to the next level by holding a second in-person event. Due to the immense impact of coronavirus at the time, our event was minimized but not succumbed to social distancing, masks, and single-use supplies. Following safety guidelines and protocols, Health is Wealth Club saw its second event, where we painted mini pumpkins and discussed the benefits of pumpkin seeds. Although this fall-themed event was a blast full of laughing, painting, chatting, and learning, a COVID exposure set quite a scare on us.
Now, when Morgan and I initially became aware of this exposure, we panicked, to say the least. But have no fear, because all was said and done when we received a negative test. We were in the clear. Nonetheless, this was absolutely the biggest challenge that our club, Health is Wealth Club, had to face. Second would probably be the initial creation of the club. Now, when Morgan and I first began the Genius Project journey in the beginning of our junior year, we had completely different projects in mind. In fact, I can bet you Mrs. Tapia and Miss Alberts are laughing at the thought of how our first Genius projects absolutely never would have worked with COVID.
I would actually like to thank our incredible club advisor, Miss Tapia, for all the assistance, motivation, and Google Meets that she has opened for us since the beginning. Thank you so much. We couldn't have done it without you.
As for right now, we are both incredibly proud to announce that Health is Wealth Club will not be done with, as it will be picked up by a current junior as a legacy Genius project for next year. As for Morgan and I, we both plan to study nutrition in college to continue our passion and love for this field. Creating this club of ours lit a spark in our hearts, igniting the passionate fire of nutrition burned through educating our peers about a topic that we both care so much about. We can't wait to see where our next 4 years take us.
The purpose of bringing this club to Sage Creek was to educate fellow Bobcats on topics such as how to create a balanced plate and how to read a basic nutrition label. Now, I can stand here today and say with great pride that Chloe and I have achieved that and so much more.
As we've mentioned, Health is Wealth Club is so much more than just a club, but a family and a community in which we are both so incredibly proud to have started. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. We are so grateful to be here. Have a great night and go Bobcats.
Hi, I'm Nick Cepek, and I'm joined by Maya Postenbaugh and Jackie Tucker. Can you guys tell me a little bit more about your Genius Project?
Yeah, so when I was presented the Genius Project, I knew that I wanted to do something with the military because I've been a new student a lot and I wanted to help out other new students. And so Maya was telling me about how in sophomore year, she didn't really have an orientation. They were like, do you want to join in on the freshman orientation? And she was like, not really, because who wants to hang out with freshmen? And so we created we joined in on Link Crew. We basically created like another program onto Link Crew for the transfer students. And so we just had a couple meetings with the transfer students to make them feel like they could meet some people and just like a better transition into the school since they were new.
And how have you used your experience to influence your Genius Project?
So as a military child, I felt kind of alone whenever I would go to a new school. And since the Genius Project was presented to me, I felt like I could do something really impactful with it using my own experience. And I thought it turned out really well, considering that's what I would have wanted as a transfer student.
And how do you envision your project's legacy at Sage Creek?
So we want to make it a legacy project because the big thing about this is that this project has a lot of potential. It's a great idea, but we weren't really able to execute it as much this year because of the pandemic. We had to do both of our meetings over a Zoom call, and it's really hard to get new students to join in on a Zoom call that they're not necessarily required to go to. So I think in person it will be a lot better, and we wanted to pass it down to someone who's also very passionate about this.
And how would you describe your Genius Project in 3 words?
I would say that it's sort of a work in progress, because we had really strong ideas and we had the perfect way to execute it, but of course we just were brought down by the pandemic. So I feel like if someone else takes it on next year, it won't be a work in progress anymore.
Well, thank you again, Maya and Jackie, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The very first day this project was introduced to our class, we sat in our 11th grade English classrooms, so blissfully unaware of what the pandemic had in store for us. We watched a TED Talk about a young boy named Richard Terreri, who built a light system to keep lions from harming his livestock. Somewhere near the end of his talk, he said, "So a year ago, I was just a boy in the Savannah grassland, herding my father's cows, and I used to see planes flying all over, and I told myself that one day, I'll be there inside." It was then that I saw myself being able to say the same thing about the Genius Project Symposium. I figured I would say something along the lines of, a year ago, I had no idea where this project would take me, but I always knew that I would end up here. And unfortunately, like I had mentioned, this was before we knew what the pandemic had in store for us, and so this didn't turn out exactly how I wanted it to. From the beginning of my junior year, I had everything planned. I had a project in mind, mentors to help facilitate me along the way, and even connections with companies countywide. And so now you're probably sitting there and thinking to yourself, you had an entire project planned start to finish before it was even yet introduced to you yet, because, well, here's the thing. In middle school, I took a design and modeling course that focused on project-based oriented learning and allowed for us to learn and implement the design process into projects that could be used as prototypes in the real world. The biggest project that this curriculum entailed was designing and constructing a prototype of a prosthetic that a child with cerebral palsy could use. This was the start of a spark and a fire that set my heart ablaze. The following semester of my 8th grade year, I became a TA for the same class and was able to learn more about AutoCAD or computer-aided design. I was also introduced to an online community called Enabling the Future, or Enable. Enable is a large group of people who work together through digital humanitarianism to better children's lives that need prosthetic devices. During my free time during this TA period, I was able to construct the very first prototype of this prosthetic that the school had ever produced. This consisted of 3 separate 6-hour prints on the school's 3D printer, as well as hours of tinkering and building. I remember specifically a conversation that I had with Principal Michael Ecker and my former teacher, Mr. Aaron Satilli, as they expressed their hopes for me to be on the Genius stage my senior year. As this program began to develop and continue, we were able to win awards and grants for furthering this effort. I had planned to continue this project by creating what is called a chapter for our community and creating more prosthetic devices during a citywide event that I had also planned on setting up. So now here's the part that you were all waiting for, how all of this could have somehow failed. I'm not sure if you've attended an event like this before. However, I tend to walk out of the Genius Project Symposium feeling inspired and motivated to tackle something big of my own. It is then that I feel when I'm inspired by these feelings, that I promise myself that I won't be another kid who lets life get in the way and doesn't get their project done. And unfortunately, this is exactly what happened to me. I'm sure you're not the same person you were a year ago, nor are you where you expected to be. This is definitely true for myself, as I lost myself completely and lost interest in things that got me motivated or excited. I found it hard to grow and navigate through high school, as well as figuring out how to manage this passion. I found it difficult to hold on to a passion that had kept me from moving forward if I was constantly looking backwards. It reminded me of the good old days in middle school, and I was unable to move forward. During this time, I also went through a terrible funk and nothing could get me out of it. I looked for help everywhere that I could get it, and this is when I turned to my faith. This was the best idea that I could have possibly ever made for my mental health journey and for my wellness overall. It was through this faith that I was able to fall in love with community. It was through this faith that I was able to fall in love with community and growing within my faith. The people that I am closest to today and my truest friends are from this journey. I became what people would call a Jesus freak and began growing in community within my faith. And now I had another passion that my heart was set on fire for, that I needed to figure out how to get my project through with it. Due to COVID, I had to learn how to implement this project in a safe way since I was overly cautious about COVID's effects since it has personally affected my family. I had planned on creating a Zoom call and a community where people could read scripture and talk about how it personally affected their lives and their life journey. And after talking to my parish's pastor about this, he expressed his concerns as this wouldn't sound good coming from a 16-year-old, let alone someone without a degree in theology. And so once again, I was thrown back to square one. My final project that I had hoped would reach all the way through to the end was to create a podcast that would document what life was like during the pandemic. I had had many deep and thought-provoking conversations with a lot of my friends, and I thought that documenting this way, the way that we lived as teenagers during 2020 and 2021 would be really important. And again, due to COVID and its effects, I was unable to find a way to create a high-quality sounding podcast over video conference platforms. And as sad as it is to stand before you today with not one but 3 failed projects, I learned much more than I could ever learn in a classroom environment. I learned about connections and patience, communication, the importance of passion and what it means to me, and the list can go on. Something I'm sure a lot of seniors can relate to is that the timeline seems so long and expansive at the start. But as time went on, just like many others, my passions changed. I found that it's clear, although people may seem as though they're fully put together, they may as well just be a mess of beautiful chaos. I'm not sure what lies ahead in my future, but I am sure that I'm going to be put on a timeline of passion for the rest of my life, and whether I choose to get on board is my choice. I'm choosing to let my passions set my heart on fire so that in turn, I can set the world ablaze. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Seepak, and I'm joined by Talia Gaines to tell us a little bit more about your Genius Project. So my first question is, how do you evaluate the impact of your project?
I just want everyone at Sage Creek to feel safe and comfortable within their peers and their teachers. That was my main goal.
And what inspired you to focus on race as it pertains to Sage Creek?
Well, growing up in Carlsbad and not being in a diverse community has taught me a lot about how my peers think of me and think of minorities in general. And it's hard growing up in that type of environment where you're not exactly accepted, and I would never want another student to feel that way.
And how do you envision the legacy of your project?
I want it to be seen as the community being brought together, specifically the Black and Mexican community.
Lastly, if you could describe your Genius Project in one word, what would that be?
Safe. I want all students on campus, no matter what their race, to feel safe and accepted.
Well, thank you, Talia, for joining me and telling us a little bit more about your Genius Project.
No problem.
If you saw a quarter on the ground and you were told you were the one that had dropped it, would you stop and pick it up? My guess is probably. What if it was a $5 bill? How about a 20 or 100? If you knew that some of your hard-earned money was just sitting somewhere, waiting to be easily claimed, I imagine you would want to retrieve it. Hi, I'm Bennett. In June of 2019, I first became aware of various unclaimed funds databases, which are basically websites run by governmental entities that identify monies that they're holding for their rightful owner. Imagine my excitement when I found a claim for my dad for a whopping $25.76. I was pretty thrilled. I considered how these findings could be expanded in a way to benefit my community. And with that, my Genius Project, the Fund Finder, was born. After I found money for my dad, I then started to search for claims belonging to local businesses. I began by contacting my first potential client, Portia of San Diego. Being a car enthusiast, this seemed like a natural starting point, and asking to speak with the general manager. Script in hand, I explained my project and how there were tens of thousands of dollars owing to the dealership. The general manager seemed somewhat skeptical. He said he would call me back, but he never did. After a few days, I realized that most people would probably think I was some type of con artist, not a high schooler trying to help his community. I mean, a guy on the phone saying there's thousands of dollars owing to you, just waiting to be claimed? Please. I realized I needed some credibility, someone or something that could vouch for me and my project. So I met with then Carlsbad Mayor Pro Tem Priya Bhat Patel to share my project, my findings, and offer my free services. I thought she would be interested since I had located thousands of dollars in unclaimed funds that were owing to the City of Carlsbad and city-controlled entities. She was impressed, and she forwarded my information to the city's finance department. In addition, she connected me with someone who could help me spread my message to a larger audience, the president and CEO of the Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce. I met with him, and he quickly embraced my idea. That summer, I focused on locating claims belonging to Chamber of Commerce members. After finding money for over 100 chamber members, which totaled over $850,000, I enthusiastically presented a workshop at the chamber, held office hours, and even presented at a chamber-sponsored networking event. But I wasn't done there. After the start of 11th grade, I located hundreds of thousands of dollars in unclaimed funds owing to UBS, which is a global financial services institution, and its customers, both locally and across the state of California. After preparing a presentation and compiling my research, I presented to a UBS business leader, which quickly turned into me presenting to a large group of UBS business leaders. It was pretty intimidating knowing that I was sharing my project with about 35% of UBS's entire US-based leadership team. But the presentation went well, and my research ended up positively impacting many individuals. In fact, I even learned that the local UBS office actually made changes to their client onboarding techniques as a result of my presentation, which was pretty exciting to hear. Turning my eye back to the Carlsbad level, I searched for unclaimed funds owing to the Carlsbad Unified School District and all of the schools within it, uncovering about $3,000. I met with Superintendent Ben Churchill, explained how the funds could be easily claimed, and sure enough, they were. Having made an impact in my local community of Carlsbad and across San Diego County, I planned on expanding my project to other local areas and industries. Then, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. What initially was supposed to be 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and then even longer. I knew I had to adapt my project, since in-person presentations, which were by far the most effective way for me to connect with my prospective clients, were no longer an option. I delved deeper, focusing on pulling together more research and compiling pages and pages of search results in Excel spreadsheets. As you can probably imagine, Excel spreadsheets are not the most exciting thing for a 17-year-old high school student. But as the number of COVID days grew larger, so did the list of businesses that I had located unclaimed funds for. I had long since surpassed my initial goal of finding $1 million in unclaimed funds. I soon surpassed $1.5 million, and I didn't plan on stopping there. With the start of my senior year and no visible end to the pandemic in sight, I once again started to reach out to local businesses by phone. My first prospective client, after this long pause, was Porsche Carlsbad, which was ironic because that was where I had started by cold calling a Porsche dealership. I was able to share with the finance manager not only numbers and data points, but also my enthusiasm. Even without seeing her face, I was able to visualize the mental gears turning as I excitedly described the simple process of claiming the funds. The same was true when I spoke with the owner of a small restaurant, a piano teacher, and an optometrist, among others. The happiness I perceived in their voices told me that I was making a difference. And the follow-up calls I received, telling me that the funds had been successfully collected, were proof. In my almost 2 years as the fund finder, I've met dozens of interesting people, from business leaders to government officials to small business owners. What united them all, despite their disparate occupations, was that they all had unclaimed funds owing to either them personally or to their employer, and sometimes both. From the start of the project, I never planned on making money. That's why I never charged a fee or asked for any portion of the monies collected. It's about what that money represents. It's about making a difference in my community, just a few dollars or thousands of dollars at a time. In the end, I was able to connect with many individuals through this project. So, if you have a free moment or two, I suggest looking at one of the many unclaimed funds databases that populate the internet. For me, roving these search tools is like a treasure hunt, and sometimes there may just be a small little prize that you didn't even know was out there. It's your money. All you have to do is look for it. Happy searching. Thank you.
I'm Cooper Hancock here at the Genius Project Symposium with
Michaela Bankovich.
And to start off, what inspired you to start your project?
So when I first started my project, I originally had a different idea. I wanted to do something centered around art and marine biology, which were two of my greatest passions. I had an idea to work with my art teacher to get involved and start working with organizations that help for marine biology. That ended up sort of not working as well as I anticipated, and I ended up reaching out to a good friend of mine who had a club that I was involved in, the Girls in STEAM Club. She asked me to take over, and I was so excited that I took over and I made it my Genius Project because it goaled me to one of my greatest desires, which was to go in a field of science, and I wanted other girls to realize the passion and dedication that it takes to be part of it.
Nice. So could you describe that process for you from finding out you're taking over a club and then also pandemic hitting and all that, and then you're also at the point where you're like, I gotta get a Genius Project done here.
Exactly.
So could you describe that for me?
Of course. So when I first was offered, I was really nervous and I was sort of on the verge of saying no because it was junior year and by far the most stressful year. We were coming up to finals and everything was coming to an end and the AP exam was right around the corner. And all I could think in my head was, no more stress. I can't do any more stress. And eventually I thought about it logically, and it was something that even as weeks passed, I really, really wanted to do. So I ended up taking over, and it was an amazing experience. I worked with Maddie and we talked, and I had all these plans to bring people in and to do meetings with the girls and have them go see colleges and meet people in the field. And then the pandemic hit, and that sort of all went sideways. And when summer hit, after everything, I sort of forgot about it. I would like to say I went and worked all summer and did a lot of work with it. That's really not the truth. Then when the start of school ended up again, I got my motivation back for doing the project. And I have an amazing sister who is part of a sorority. And she has a lot of connections for girls that are older than her in a field of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So I reached out to her and she helped me bring in women who would be willing to be flexible with me and meet during in between breaks for them, or in between being at the office, or many of them were stuck at home. So it was sort of worked out really, really well in my favor. So I just reached out to girls. I already had girls interested in being part of the club with me and being executives and rolling it with me, because I worked out I was going to need more than just myself doing it. So I had them join me, and we reached out to other girls that were interested, and girls from past years that had been part of the club, and they were so thrilled to join, and the club has been running smoothly ever since.
Nice. So now with the club going on the year, how did it go? Like, did you actually feel like you got pretty much all the things you wanted to get done with maybe that vision that you possibly had last year, or do you think a lot of things were like lost in the process?
So I would say I fulfilled it more than I expected. With the pandemic hitting, I honestly expected it to sort of end, and for me to have to, give a talk about how I didn't finish the project. I lost my motivation, I lost my way. But really, I found myself more motivated being stuck at home because I had all that free time. It was easy to communicate with people, and having all those role models in my life that I really wanted to bring into the girls' life was really easy for me. I had my team help me out with reaching out to people, and it was good for them as well. It's a good experience for girls to learn how to communicate well with others and to learn that sort of skill. I had to learn it as well. I usually don't like running a club or being the center of everyone's attention or talking in front of class even, so that was sort of new for me. But it was a fun journey.
Great. So to end it off, what is like one word to describe like your entire project and like the process you've had?
I'd say passion for me, because it came from my passion and my greatest desire to have other girls follow somebody's lead, or to take initiative to just take charge of a challenging job and the workforce that they have.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cameron Zablon, and I'm here to talk about how we can slow down fast fashion. Let's say you are perusing the aisles of your favorite clothing store, and you pick up a $20 top, and you think, wow, this is a really cool top. I should get it even though I have 20 other shirts exactly like it. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have thought this while clothes shopping, but have any of you ever thought to wonder the origins of the top you just picked up? Probably not, right? Well, let me ask you a few more questions. Where are the clothes you are wearing from today? What brand are they, and how much did it cost you? Most people do not know that the clothes they wear are a product of the fast fashion industry, an industry of underpaid labor where the workers are paid less than $1 an hour in horrendous working conditions. Now you could be thinking, what does that have anything to do with me buying this top? Well, I'm not here to tell you to stop buying clothes altogether or guilt you out from buying from specific brands. I'm simply here to educate you of the harsh reality behind fast fashion. We live in a world that is ever-changing in all aspects of life. However, the most detrimental to its workers and the environment are the ever-changing trends of fashion. Many people say to just donate old clothes that don't fit the trend of today. However, most do not know that the clothes that they donate are most likely going to be returned back to the third world countries that made them, thus making it more difficult for them to build up their own sense of fashion or culture, or even a clothing industry, making it even more difficult for their already struggling economies to advance forward. We need to understand and be more aware of the ethics behind sustainable fashion versus fast fashion. And I myself have surrounded myself with the facts and have been disheartened by the reality behind the clothing manufacturing business. Fast fashion is an industry of, again, underpaid labor, where in third world countries, they are made to mass produce clothing to keep up with the ever-changing trends in fashion. And this field of work is dominated by female workers. And sadly for them, this is the best job that they will get, as opposed to sex work or life-threatening jobs like mining. Most fast fashion stores can be found together all in a mall, in a common shopping mall or the outlets. Sometimes they can be found all together in a row. With H&M being the biggest user of fast fashion, it is followed by Forever 21, Uniqlo, Zara, Shein, and Topshop, and many more. These companies seek out the cheapest labor manufacturing, knowing that they are desperate for work, and they pay them close to nothing as compared to what they marketed out on for the racks. Of course, there are brands that use ethical and sustainable clothing, which I would advocate for people to buy more than fast fashion, and it's called fair trade fashion. And this includes brands like Madewell, Athleta, Patagonia, and Levi's, to name a few. So how did I get to fashion with this Genius Project? I started this Genius Project my junior year with the idea of Hawaiian shirts for shelter, where I would sew hundreds of Hawaiian shirts for dogs and sell them at local swap meets. And this is what they look like. It would take me about 30 minutes to make about one, and it would cost about $6 to make at least one. After crunching some numbers and realizing it would be impossible for me to self-fund and make every single shirt on my own to sell at a swap meet. So this plan was essentially busted because I did not have the time or money to follow through with it. So going into senior year, I decided I would keep the same project, but instead make Hawaiian shirts for all of the dogs in a single shelter in hopes of increasing their adoption rates. This was a little bit before COVID-19 hit, and I was already in contact with a few shelters to propose my plan, and specifically the Rancho Coastal Humane Society. I was about to go propose my plan when the world had shut down. This is when everyone decided to adopt a dog for a quarantine buddy, and with no dogs or cats in the shelter, there was no purpose to my plan. So going into my summer of my senior year, I was so stressed, and I asked my sister, Kaylin, what do I do now? I want to keep the sewing aspects of my old projects into the new one, but I needed to find a new community impact. And I asked her, what impact can I make with just sewing? So she told me about a project that she had in her own college classes that she had to talk about fair trade fashion. So she gave the speech to me, and I became intrigued with the idea of learning more about fast fashion, the opposing of fair trade fashion. This is when I did a little bit more research and I watched the documentary, The True Cost. It's a documentary that exposes and gives a deeper look into the environments and the working conditions of communities where clothing manufacturing is dense. And with that, my opinion over fashion had a complete 180. I felt disgust towards fashion, specifically fast fashion. And I decided I want to expose it to my community and share this information with them and have them learn what I have also learned. That is when I created a blog where it is full of resources and facts about fast fashion and how we can make a change in our communities to slow it down. Then I decided I wanted to make my own change, not just do research or make a blog. I wanted to sew still. So that is when I created my own clothing line of slow fashion, a clothing line that is made up from upcycled clothing, recycled materials, and even from scratch. I started by sewing a top, which then resulted me in sewing 4 more tops, a dress, 4 pleated skirts, and about 2 upcycled dresses. Now, people could be asking or thinking, why don't you just go out and buy a new top for $10, $15? Well, I mean, that's not a terrible idea as it took hours of sewing and hundreds of pleats later, but it is what fueled my passion to continue sewing throughout high school. I loved sewing in middle school, and I sewed costumes for middle school conventions or cosplay conventions, as some would know it as. But after sewing for so long, I realized that the cost per costume were a little too unattainable for my middle school wallet. So I transitioned to more casual and more conventional clothing when I went into high school to sew. So, with the completion of a clothing line, I feel that I have completed a project where I can both share my passion and bring a change to my community. I went into this Genius Project thinking the only way to bring change to my community was through monetary and physical change. However, after changing my project multiple times, I have come to the realization that self-education and showing that same knowledge and sharing it with my community is just as, if not more, important than if I were to just raise money and donate it to a specific foundation. So, with the finalization of this project, I have the power to share the knowledge with the people in my community that I can share with anyone and everyone who can make their own difference and take a stand as I have as well. So, let's make a change in our communities, and let's slow down fast fashion, as we are the consumers falling for cheap prices in an industry of dark and horrible conditions. So let's slow down fast fashion. Thank you.
I'm Cooper Hancock here at the Genius Project Symposium, and I'm here with
Emma Belknap.
And to start it off, what inspired you to start your project?
Yeah, so every single year in our Theater 3 class, we do something called the Senior Directing Project. So basically the actors are going to take a favorite scene that they have from a movie or play, and the seniors will cast all the underclassmen in it. And I knew ever since that I was a freshman that I wanted to write and direct my own play.
Great. So what was the process like for you from like starting off with just an idea to finally getting down to this is actually what you want to do, and also maybe like some setbacks along the way?
I think that just theater in general was going to be really slowed because of the pandemic. I think that it really changed the way we were acting. We had to all act in masks, and it was really tough for us to even be able to act inside till I'd say like late winter, spring. That's when we were able to do our shows here. So doing the show in fall, I specifically wrote the play like for being physically on the stage, not wearing masks. So I think that point after summer, I think a lot of us thought that the pandemic would have ended by then, but then of course we finally are just getting the mask mandate off, and it's like late spring at this point. Yeah. So going back to the fall mindset, I think I had to kind of just make it virtual and just kind of roll the punches on it.
Nice. So when that pandemic hit, were you ever at the point where you're like, I don't know if this is going to happen, or were you always like staying optimistic that finally one day, like during your senior year, you'll be able to actually do the play?
Mm-hmm. I think that there were definitely times where I kind of felt like I didn't know how I was going to do it, because I think putting on a play during the pandemic is tough as is, so then putting on a play during the pandemic virtually is going to be so much more challenging, because the play, like I said before, is written for the stage. So I'd have people using stage directions like, oh, I can't talk to you and you're so far away, can you come stage center? So I kind of thought like, how can I do this virtually? But then my theater teacher pointed out that it's actually funnier virtually, kind of like be calling out stage directions and breaking the fourth wall, and you are online. So we were able to use Zoom background since it was online, and since it was so much closer with the camera, you could see all the actors' expressions better. And I kind of liked how it turned out better, actually, just being able to do it virtually.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool how everyone had their own backgrounds, and you guys did whatever you can to make it actually seem like a play.
Oh, you watched the play?
Yeah, I did. I watched
That's
it.
so cool.
Yeah, I really liked it because it definitely seems like the most difficult thing, especially with doing it online, a whole play, and everyone's joining and leaving. But I felt like you did a really good job with that, and everyone. You probably appreciate all the people that helped you with that, right?
I definitely did appreciate all the people that helped me with that. I knew that blocking would be tougher, so all my actors would meet with me after school, and we'd run extra rehearsals, we'd run extra blocking, I'd give them all my notes. So they all worked really, really well with me, since we all knew that it was going to be tougher.
Great. So just end it off, what's one word to describe your project as a whole?
I'm going to say perseverance.
Okay, thank you.
I want you all to imagine a time when you were completely breathtaking. It could be Christmas morning when you walked down the stairs and you found a bunch of presents under the tree, or seeing a beautiful view after a long, rewarding hike. An experience that not only took your breath away, but changed your perspective on life. I have an experience that I want to share with you today, and it's not as conventional as Christmas morning. My breathtaking experience was an anaphylactic reaction, a time where I truly couldn't breathe. About 4 years ago, I was in a foreign country. I ate something that was made with peanuts, and within seconds, I could feel my throat begin to swell, and it quickly became difficult for me to breathe. I was having an anaphylactic reaction. Fortunately, I had my EpiPen with me, and I was injected. In the end, everything was okay, but this experience not only took my breath away, but changed my perspective on food allergies. When I heard about the Genius Project, I saw this as an opportunity to help myself and others with food allergies. And I quickly became passionate about this idea because there are 32 million people in the US who are just like me. Not only is that a great number of people, but the number is actually rising. According to CDC, the prevalence of food allergies in children have increased by 50% between 1997 and 2011. We need to combat this rise with education. Not many people know about the dangers of cross-contamination or even how to use an EpiPen. In fact, I get a crazy look when this falls out of my purse. It's an EpiPen, and many people don't even know or recognize this life-saving device. With this in mind, I decided to create an EpiPen training session and spread awareness on food allergies. Education can be so valuable. It can potentially save a life when an EpiPen is necessary or prevent an allergic reaction from happening. Personally, I probably haven't had so many trips to the ER if there was just a little bit more education in this world. In my next steps, I met with Glenda Harris, the school nurse, and Julia Hart, the district nurse. I shared my idea with them, and they gave me some statistics and articles so I can be teaching people accurate information. And then I contacted people for a venue, since I was expecting about 20 to 30 people to attend. I had a location, a presentation, and a variety of different EpiPen training devices. Everything began to fall into place until the start of the pandemic, and life was on pause. For a while, I was stuck, and I thought I couldn't go through with this in-person event. But I was motivated by the thought of all the people I could be helping, and I kept on reminding myself of the huge impact I could be making. So I continued to work by creating a website where I could post the information I had, and I also uploaded some food allergy-friendly recipes. A few months later, I had a new idea. Instead of the seminar, I could create a video to put on this website. So over the summer, I started working. I was able to contact my friend Sayla Short, who helped me film and edit, and I got some friends together to act in my film. I contacted a local restaurant, Vigalucci's, and I was able to film there, as well as the park and in my backyard. The video was definitely the biggest challenge of my Genius Project journey. I have zero experience with filming or directing, and it kind of felt like the blind leading the blind. The cameras weren't working, the park had screaming children, and I kept them pushing back the filming dates because I didn't quite feel ready. But at the end of the summer, I had a video with 3 different scenes on how to use an EpiPen, how to avoid cross-contamination, and how to order food at a restaurant. All scenes that reflected on my personal experiences with food allergies. By the beginning of my senior year, I thought I was done with my project. I had my passion. I was definitely challenged. But when I checked on the number of viewers, I realized I barely made an impact. So I continued to work by creating a social media page where I could promote my video. And finally, I was able to get my video to 175 viewers and counting. Not only did this exceed my expectations, but this actually had a larger impact than I initially planned with a seminar, since I was expecting only 20 to 30 people to attend. In some ways, this is how the pandemic actually made my project better, because you can watch the video on your own time. In a strange way, the Genius Project is much like an allergic reaction. Everything is running smoothly until suddenly your stomach does a somersault and you're throwing up in a foreign country. Okay, maybe it's not exactly like an allergic reaction, But once you find your EpiPen or a solution to your problem, everything begins to run smoothly again. From this project, I learned that passion is really what fuels us. And being adaptable is vital to success. At some point in our lives, we will all experience something that takes our breath away. These experiences are opportunities for growth and ultimately what makes us better. Thank you for listening, and if you are interested in watching my film, this QR code will take you directly to the link. Thank you.
At the start of the coronavirus pandemic, I would still see senior citizens at the grocery store putting themselves at risk. I began talking to friends and family about this issue and wondered if they had anybody to reach out to get their groceries for them. I know that my grandparents have nearby family getting them the groceries that they need, but I know that not every senior citizen has that luxury. So I decided to be a changemaker. I founded and currently serve as president for Grocery Grab, a free grocery shopping service for senior citizens and other at-risk individuals operated entirely by high school students. First, I reached out to a few classmates and created Grocery Grab. We were able to form a collaborative team of 17 student volunteers, and I'm so grateful for their hard work and dedication. Then I went to the Carlsbad Senior Center and passed out flyers to the nearby elderly during the Elderly Meal Distribution Pickup Program. I kept expanding the program to new people, advertising on the Nextdoor app, social media, and by word of mouth. At the same time, I began outlining the details for how the program would work. First, a senior citizen would call, text, or email us with information like their grocery list, preferred store, address, and method of payment. Then, I would give this information to one of the volunteers available, and they would go shopping for the senior citizen. At the beginning of the pandemic, though, it was a little hard to shop at grocery stores when aisles look like this. So we asked that senior citizens send backup items in case their first choice wasn't there. Of course, some items were nowhere to be found, like hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, and weirdly enough, as I'm sure you all remember, toilet paper. So, once the volunteer has all the items, they'll go to checkout and pay using their own money. They'll get all the groceries and drop them off right at the senior's doorstep and pick up an envelope with the payment. There's no additional charge other than the reimbursement for the groceries themselves. Sometimes, though, the senior citizens will feel inclined to give an optional monetary tip. However, I knew that this money would have a greater impact if we didn't keep it to ourselves. So, all of it is donated to the San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund, a charity helping vulnerable community members. So I had the outline for my Genius project. Everything was going great. We began to help numerous senior citizens across North County, and then one day I got great news. One of the students volunteering with Grocery Grab had a connection to a City of Carlsbad official, and they reached out to see if we could partner with the City of Carlsbad. I was so excited. I had big aspirations to help the entire senior citizen community of Carlsbad. This official began serving as a mentor to Grocery Grab, and they provided a lot of useful insight. At the same time, students from another high school in San Diego reached out to me to see if they could start their own branch of Grocery Grab in their community. I thought this was amazing. The entire point of my project was to help people, so this would just help an entirely new community. But at this time, Grocery Grab had reached a point where I had a different vision than the City of Carlsbad official. I thought that we should focus on helping this new group of people, and they thought that we should focus on ourselves first. So we parted ways. At least I still had the second branch though, right? Or so I thought. Shortly after, the students bailed on creating the second branch. It was a low point in my project. I felt like I was back to square one. But I'm resilient, so I kept on pushing through. Much to my surprise, people wanted to recognize Grocery Grab for the work we were doing in the community. NBC News, the San Diego Union Tribune, and more were able to highlight our program. This recognition allowed for more and more people to hear about Grocery Grab, and then one day I got an interesting email. A member of the Helpful Honda People of San Diego reached out inquiring to see if we could jointly help members of the community. I jumped on this offer right away. After much coordination, we had a great idea. gave free groceries to an entire low-income senior housing complex in Carlsbad. After reaching out to numerous senior apartments, one finally agreed, the Tavarua Senior Apartments near the Carlsbad Village. We turned this idea into a big one-day event and had their volunteers and ours working hand in hand. In partnership with the local Ralphs, we were able to package and bag a grocery bag for each individual in the senior housing complex. Then we were able to drop off the groceries right at their doorstep. Some of the volunteers were even able to speak to some of the seniors and learn about their interesting past and gain some of the wisdom that they had to give. It was a high point in my Genius project. I felt like I had made a significant impact on my community, and these senior citizens were overjoyed. See, my Genius project had lots of ups and downs, but I learned one thing that will stick with me for the rest of my life. In my favorite book, Outliers: The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell, he reveals that those who are successful turn their adversity into opportunity. While others solely viewed the coronavirus pandemic as a negative influence, entrepreneurs like myself envision innovation's ability to overcome these unprecedented times and unify the community. I was able to turn this obstacle in my life into a way to help others. At the beginning of quarantine, I would have never imagined that Grocery Grab would deliver over 10,000 grocery items and donate over $2,500 to charity. At the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, I could have just seen it as an obstacle and given up. I could have just left Grocery Grab as crazy thoughts and ideas. I could have just seen it all as a what if. But instead, I took action. And along with it came great success. So for those of you in the audience, the next time you encounter a challenge, I encourage you to ask yourself, how can I turn this into an opportunity? Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing show. The beauty of all this adaptability is that it looks different for everyone. We saw everything from exploring new ways to support healthy living to educating others in new ways.
The Genius Project has allowed us to take a shot at our dreams and see what we can do as individuals.
On behalf of Sage Creek High School Genius Project, we thank you. We'd love to take this opportunity to officially recognize our seniors for being their Bobcat best.
To honor their effort and excellence, we've given each of our seniors a commemorative plaque to remind them of their projects at Sage Creek High School with the Genius Project.
Thank you so much, everyone.